I love The Legend of Zelda. I've loved the series for as long as I can remember, but unlike many fans, I've really always had a preference for the 2D games. But since Nintendo doesn't seem interested in creating any new 2D Zelda games, I've had to go with indie projects to fill the void. When I picked up Tunic, that's what I thought I was going to get, just another indie homage to the Zelda formula. What I ended up getting was the best game I've played all year and a good reminder for what makes 2D Zelda games so special. You don't have to try very hard to find Zelda elements in Tunic. You wake up on a beach just like Link's Awakening, except in this game you're not a young Hylian with aphasia, but a fox. For all intents and purposes, you are pretty much Link if he embraced his inner persona. I mean, look at this guy, the colors, the shield, the sword, the tunic. If one of Nintendo's lawyers was watching this at 240p, they'd be mashing that DMCA button. But despite callbacks, Tunic isn't trying to look exactly like a Zelda game. It's not trying to make its own Octoroks or Stalfos or Gorons. It has its own unique visual style. The first unique stylistic component is that this game isn't a overhead view but an isometric one. This stylistic choice bleeds over into the gameplay in interesting and pretty substantial ways, but we'll save that for the gameplay section. The other way that Tunic stands out is that it's very sharp. A lot of the models have single-digit polygon counts leading to these sharp spiky points like on the trees or even the bushes. Even our little fox boy is pretty low poly. These low poly models also sport some simplistic texturing. They're not quite rocking a flat textured look, but they do get pretty close in certain areas. If the Link's Awakening remaster was going for a modeled clay look, Tunic is much closer to origami made of construction paper. From a technical and stylistic standpoint, I think that the visuals are fantastic. A lot of the building blocks are very simple, but when the models and effects are layered together, it creates a visually stunning image. The game has a very tactile, almost diorama feeling to it, and I personally really love the look that they went for. The fantastic visuals are brought to new heights by the beautiful soundtrack. While the visual language of Tunic borrows quite a few elements from the Zelda series, I don't think that the soundtrack really does. The soundtrack reminded me more of David Wise's work on the Donkey Kong Country series, but less simian segue and more sticker brush symphony or aquatic ambience. I also heard a synth or two that had me thinking of lens flares and 3-clicks Philip. On the whole, the music is very ambient and mysterious, generally opting for a more stripped back sound of angelic synth pads and piano plucks. To me, this symphony of synthesizers is auditory heaven, even if it does lack some of the more straightforward anthems that the Zelda series typically brings. The soundtrack does a lot of the legwork in making each zone feel unique and alive. The soundtrack also sets the tone for each of the zones. The mysterious places feel more tense and unknown, the beaches feel more relaxing and sunny, and the slower moments feel all the more introspective. An action-adventure game is only effective when an area looks and sounds like a place worth exploring, and Tunic nails the presentation of this new world. Like with the visuals, the nods to the Zelda series are immediately clear in the gameplay. The controls and moveset will be familiar to anyone that's played Zelda in the last 20 years. Just like our favorite Hylian lawnmower, you can cut the grass and smash pots. Something cool about the grass is that it actually stays cut. It saves someone like me, who almost obsessively cuts all the grass in every Zelda game, from going back and exploring areas that I've already been to. It's easy to tell at a glance if I've been here or not. Tunic even borrows some elements from 3D Zelda games, incorporating things like Z-targeting and dodge rolling. I found the basic movement to be fast and fluid, but it did take me some getting used to. I'm gonna take 99% of the blame for this. I have this really weird thing in isometric games deciding what up means. My brain likes to rotate the whole world, so part of my brain thinks that holding up on the stick should take me this way, when in reality, holding up should always take you, you know, straight up. Anyways, once I stopped pinballing off the walls like an alcoholic, I realized that Tunic is much more than just a standard Zelda game. The bonfires, the corpse runs, and hard bosses were reminding me of a different series altogether. They are reminding me of the classic series, Lords of the Fallen. Don't let these Souls elements scare you off though. The game is really only as hard as you want it to be. If you find the challenge to be too high, you can straight up turn on God mode in the settings. Personally, I found the difficulty balance to be right where I wanted it. The basic enemies can kill you if you're really bad, but generally the challenge is only in the boss encounters. I stopped playing once or twice due to these bosses absolutely kicking my ass, but coming back with a fresh mind was enough to beat them. I even found one of the bosses downright easy. The only time that I was taking a peek at the options menu for that God mode was in some of the final encounters. Pro tip, if you're struggling with a boss, explore for upgrades, play on the defense to learn the patterns, and use your bombs. Bombs are easily replenished. If you ever run out, you can go to the absolutely horrifying shopkeeper for more of them. There's other Souls elements that play differently here than in other games. Take the corpse runs for an example. In Souls games, corpse runs are typically a tense moment to try and get back everything that you've lost, but that really isn't their purpose in Tunic. Tunic only sees you losing 20 coins as a punishment, which during the early game is quite a lot, but by late game that's seriously nothing. Corpse runs in Tunic actually serve as a boost to someone having an issue in a certain area or against a certain boss. When you go back to where you died and grab your ghost, it blows out in a big radius, stunning enemies as well as doing a little bit of damage. So if you're in an enclosed area like a boss arena, you're almost guaranteed some free damage on a stunned opponent just by grabbing your ghost. Tunic also has a leveling system that's really only like the Souls games on paper. Both of them see you using a bonfire to spend currency, which is collected by killing enemies. They both also see you upgrading a single stat at a time, but Tunic adds an additional requirement of items, meaning that you have to have the gold, the item, and the bonfire. In practice, this change removes grinding as a viable strategy, as there's only so many items to level up your stats. Instead, it encourages exploration to find more of those items needed for leveling. The game further incentivizes exploring by making chests be one of the best ways to get more gold. This way, the game doesn't require you to do a lot of combat to level combat skills. Instead, it wants you to explore the world in order to make combat easier. These two gameplay changes go a long way to invite players to explore the world instead of being afraid of it. It also helps that exploration has rewards that aren't just gold or leveling items, like collecting pieces of a bottle to increase the amount of health flasks that you can drink, stumbling upon new weapons, finding new accessories to do things like increase health drops, or even something as simple as just finding a new shortcut. At every turn, Tunic wants you to explore the world around you. If you really want to pigeonhole Tunic into the camp of a Dark Souls game, it's far and away the easiest and most forgiving Souls-like you could ever play. It's by no means completely devoid of challenge, but outside of the bosses, Tunic is a game about exploration, knowledge, and discovery, and not really a game about your raw combat skills. But there is another element that Tunic and the Souls games have in common. They are both vague as fuck. You know how in the Souls games you'll talk to somebody and they'll hit you with something like,
"The waning crescent sleeps when the night star admonishes the behemoth's tears,"
and they just assume that you know whatever the fuck that's supposed to mean? Well, imagine they tell you that same thing except they're speaking Mandarin and there's no way for you to change the language setting. That's what playing Tunic is like, and it's fucking awesome. Tunic is not in English. Tunic is not even in any human language. 99% of the game is in Runic, which is a made-up language for the game. Before we go further, yes, the language can be translated back into English, and no, you don't need to do that to beat the game. But you're probably thinking to yourself, that sounds too cryptic. I mean, if the game isn't in English, how the hell am I even supposed to know where to go? Well, if you are rapidly aging like me, you go to the place that all the answers used to be, the game's manual. Tunic has an in-game manual that you find pages of throughout your journey. Like a normal manual, it contains everything from tips and tricks down to basic controls. This is the main gameplay gimmick that separates Tunic from being just another Zelda clone. But just like everything else, this manual isn't in English. Despite the language barrier, this manual is extremely important in your progression in Tunic. Learning to read the pictures, understand the maps, and generally fill in gaps with what you think is right will take you a long way. If you grew up on the NES and read Nintendo Power as a kid, I'm gonna bet that this experience of using the manual is gonna warp you back to the late 1980s, sitting on the floor in front of your parents' old tube TV. I'm not quite in that generation, but I still do remember game manuals pretty fondly. I remember hyping myself up by reading them in the back of my parents' car on the way back from the game store. I never thought that a game would take that feeling and make it a main gameplay mechanic, but hey, here we are. But let's just say that you're not from either of those generations, you don't remember manuals, and you have no nostalgia for them. Does the idea of a manual as an in-game mechanic stand on its own merits? I think it does. A lot of this is down to the way that Tunic has modernized certain elements. It's a clear NES homage, but it changes a lot of those things that made NES games frustrating. A lot of those NES games back in the day felt like they required extra documents like Nintendo Power or a strategy guide. Even the original Legend of Zelda, which this game takes a huge inspiration from, had bullshit elements like guessing which bushes to burn to find the new dungeon. This game pretty much abandons all of that. Progression is relatively straightforward, with the in-game manual acting as a helpful tool and a nudge in the right direction. Anytime I felt stuck, I would pull up the manual instead of pulling up Google, and every time except for some of the really late game stuff, the manual held all the answers that I needed. I've seen some people point out that the progression is too obtuse and the manual isn't helpful enough, but if I'm being completely honest, that sounds like a skill issue.
Skill issue.
If you have any basic pattern recognition, understanding of the Zelda genre at all, or minimal critical thinking skills, most of the obstacles can be overcome with ease. The manual isn't going to explicitly tell you where you need to go or what you need to do. It's not going to pop down quest markers or give you reminders of what the main objective is. Progression is the puzzle, and the manual is the hint book. The game rarely, if ever, puts you in a position where you don't have the tools and the knowledge to progress. We're going to have some very mild gameplay spoilers in this next section, but here we go. Somebody call up Ty Lopez because we're huffing on some Lambo fumes and talking about that knowledge. Knowledge is the name of the game in Tunic, and the more you know, the better the game becomes. So many of the game's crucial unlocks are actually new synapses in your monkey brain and not in-game items. We can start really simple. From the first minute, you can dodge roll and run. You find a page early on that says that you can do this, but finding that page does not unlock that ability. The crazier thing that I found out is that from the first minute you could use these teleport pads. No joke, when I figured that out, I audibly said, that's so fucking cool. I don't know, maybe I'm weird, but games that give you the tools to do something from the first minute only to explicitly tell you how to later are awesome. Most of the things that make moving around and combat faster are learned skills rather than in-game items, making second playthroughs less tedious as you aren't waiting around to unlock faster movement or more fun game mechanics. There's also things that the game just never tells you how to do, or maybe I just missed it. I'm not going to explicitly spoil what I mean, besides saying that you should experiment with your items, and also press some buttons that do nothing, just get creative. maybe my favorite example of in-game knowledge being useful is the shortcuts. Shortcuts aren't exactly unique. A lot of these games have shortcuts, and it's usually the result of throwing a switch to physically change the environment. This game has its fair share of those, but there's also a ton of shortcuts that involve shoving this fox nose into places that it just doesn't belong. Remember how I said that the camera plays a role in the gameplay? These shortcuts are really what I mean. The fixed camera means that there are secrets hidden pretty much everywhere. Like take here for example, can you guess where the shortcut is? Is it here? Here? Maybe it's here? Oh, I don't know, maybe right here. Did you guess that I could just walk straight through this? I sure didn't. Every time I found one of these, I felt like I was either 1000 IQ for finding them, or a fucking moron for not finding it sooner. Waterfalls, weird patches of flowers, dark corners, pretty much every nook and cranny is filled with secrets. This is satisfying because I like being rewarded for going places that I feel like I really shouldn't be able to get to. It's even more satisfying because the aforementioned leveling system rewards the natural curiosity to explore. Tunic is a game all about knowledge. The collection of that knowledge, either through in-game means or out-of-game experience, is a consistent high point, rewarding curiosity and experimentation like any good Zelda game should. Okay, real spoilers now, we're talking about late game stuff. The game does have low points, especially the end section. After finishing the 3 keys section of the game, you get to challenge the final boss. In theory, you could probably beat it here, and I didn't. Dying thrusts the game into night and turns our fox into a ghost. This change makes the game a lot harder. Think of the Dark World from Link to the Past if going there took away all the health and magic upgrades you've earned. This section also houses the most punishing combat encounters. I know it's not a Souls game without a swamp, but seriously, this place was the only time that I died to normal enemies somewhat routinely. Though to the game's credit, it somehow managed to make straight up invisible enemies feel pretty fair by giving them clear audio and visual tells, so congratulations. But the swamp section turns into a sewer pretty fast because it ends with an absolute barrage of bullshit. There's an elevator that's a one-way ticket to getting fucked over. Down here is a gauntlet of agony where the game asks you to kill a bunch of high-level enemies one after the other. It's tied for the hardest encounter in the game, except I found each death more frustrating than the final boss. After killing those guys and crawling out of the sewer, the quest is to get all the power back and fight the final boss again. This is done by going to all of the Grave of the Hero locations and praying at them. This whole quest felt less like a puzzle and more like a lame scavenger hunt. Everything past the boss rush felt more like padding than anything else. Still mostly enjoyable padding, and I guess technically optional padding, but padding nonetheless. After the scavenger hunt, I was restored to my previous stats. I was ready to fight the final boss, or at least I thought. It took me a bunch of times to beat the final boss. Time after time I died, but after a while, I beat him. Just kidding, he's got 2 forms.
Skill issue.
When I'm editing, just go ahead and put in that ancient "Welcome to Dark Souls, bitch" Zelda meme. That's still funny, right? Doesn't matter, just put it in there. With hard work and dedication to not use God mode in the options menu, I finally beat the game. Kind of. See, I got the bad ending. The game wants you to go do some other stuff to get the good ending, and after doing that and getting both, I just don't think it was worth it. The Holy Cross puzzles are cryptic and pretty fun, but if you're doing it just to get the better ending, it's gonna be very disappointing. Truth be told, I found both endings to be somewhat unfulfilling, but I'm gonna say that's more of a result of me not understanding the narrative. I don't know what's the best way to put this. I don't know what the fuck happened in Tunic. I don't understand the lore. I don't know what my role was. I'm not even sure that I was the good guy. To be clear, this is not really a knock against the game. Not knowing what's going on is absolutely a result of me not going deep into translating the game. But to my defense, I don't think most average players are going to interact with the game that deep. So they're probably going to be just as confused during the end credits as I was. There could be a fantastic narrative here, but that narrative necessitates you doing a lot of extra legwork to even piece it together. I might do that legwork at a later time, but for now, I'm not going to pass judgment on the quality of a story that I have not properly experienced. Tunic is something special, a clear labor of love by an extremely small team of dedicated artists and developers. They've made a game with a level of polish that rivals the games that inspired it. Despite taking heavy inspiration from those other games, I don't think that it requires you to have played them or even be a fan of them to enjoy this game. From the Link to the Past fanboys to the person that thinks that this is Zelda, there's an enjoyable adventure for both of them here. We might have to wait till 2023 or beyond for the next game to have a Zelda slapped on the box, but luckily Tunic provides a fantastic and unique Zelda experience to tide us over in the meantime.
That's right, we're Japanese.